How does a person secure a spot in a vault? Vault-Tec only ever built 122 vaults across the entire country, and each one was designed to hold about 1,000 people at capacity. Now, if you do the math, that's just 122,000 spots in total in a country that has hundreds of millions of people, which means less than 1 in every 1,000 Americans had a shot at getting in. That's a very short list. But how do you even get on it? There are a couple of ways, and the most straightforward one is to just buy it. Vault-Tec ran what was basically nuclear apocalypse insurance, complete with door-to-door salesmen who'd knock on your door with a clipboard and try to close a deal before their coworker down the street sold you one first. In fact, in the TV series, Cooper Howard, the guy who later became the Ghoul, spoiler alert, was actually one of the faces of the commercials with the tagline, "And now you can be a hero too," by purchasing a residence in a Vault-Tec vault today. Now, the actual price tag of a spot in the vault isn't actually ever revealed, but the price of the vault was revealed to be around $400 billion to $650 billion. So you can safely assume that the only people who got in there were the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezoses of Fallout. But that's the thing, not all of the vault dwellers were billionaires, which takes us to the second option on how you can get a spot in these vaults. Get pre-selected. Vault-Tec and the shadowy federal apparatus behind Project Safehouse handpicked segments of the population they wanted inside, the best and brightest, as Vault 76's marketing put it. But this only meant scientists, government insides, and anyone Vault-Tec had deemed as good subjects for their secret twisted experiments. Spoiler alert. For example, musicians got walked into Vault 92 under the impression that they were being honored for their art, when really they were just the test subjects for weaponized sound waves. In another case, people who were hooked on drugs were funneled into Vault 95 and were sold the idea that they were being given a fresh start, all for that to crumble when a double agent revealed there was a hidden stash all along. Meanwhile, an entire middle school's worth of kids got walked into Vault 75 while their parents got quietly disposed of upstairs. Military service worked too. Nate got into Vault 111 for free because he was a decorated veteran and the cryogenics experiment needed pristine subjects with a fresh baby to freeze. Now, the last option was to win one, essentially. Vault-Tec ran promotional tours and gave out prizes like the Pressed Vault Suit Award. Once your spot was locked in, you got a formal letter and a reserved quarters assignment. But here's where it gets grim. For every person who got a letter saying they'd been accepted, there were hundreds more who got a rejection letter, a polite thank you for your interest from Vault-Tec, sometimes with a helpful suggestion to apply to a facility in Oklahoma or Canada instead, which was code for "you're going to die, but at a reasonable distance from us." And some people didn't even get the rejection letter. They just found out on the day when the sirens went off, and their name wasn't on any list. So if you've ever wondered about the skeletons in the wasteland huddled near sealed vault doors, sometimes still holding little cardboard signs begging to be let in, that's who those were. How did people get to the vaults so fast? The first thing to get out of the way is that the bombs didn't fall all at once. New York and Pennsylvania got hit first. You see, reports of nuclear detonations were coming in on television before Boston was hit, and Boston was hit before some of the smaller inland cities were touched at all, which means the further you were from a major target, the more time you had. If you lived close to your vault, lucky you, that was your ticket. Vault 111 was famously within running distance of Sanctuary Hills. This is exactly how the sole survivor and their family were able to sprint across the bridge and up the hill in the few minutes between the news broadcast and the mushroom cloud rising over the horizon. Meanwhile, Vault 75 was tucked underneath a middle school, which meant that test subjects were already sitting at their desks when the sirens went off. Vault 4 and Vault 88 both had people living inside them before the bombs even fell because Vault-Tec was running long-term operations there, so a chunk of the population was preloaded. But that's really not the whole story, because much of Vault-Tec knew when the bombs were already coming. They had access to early warning systems that the general public didn't, which meant their employees, key personnel, and reserved residents got a heads-up window that the average citizen never saw. If you were a paying customer with a reservation, you likely got a call, a knock, or a siren specifically pointed at you, not the delayed public broadcast that arrived when the missiles were already in the air. And you have to understand that people were preparing for years before the bombs actually dropped, which is part of the reason why plenty of vaults never got filled. You see terminals in Vault 81 and Vault 111 show entries about scientists and staff who never made it inside because they thought the sirens were just another drill out of the thousands of drills that had been happening for years. It was a classic cry wolf effect that wore everyone down and made them lazy. And so by 2077, half the country probably rolled their eyes when the alarm finally did go off, which is such a horrible way to go. Here you are basically winning the lottery by getting a spot in a vault, and you roll your eyes at the siren like a boomer. How did vaults not run out of food, water, and air after 200 years? 200 years is a long time to be underground, long enough that you'd expect any bunker on Earth to have burned through its supplies, choked on its own carbon dioxide, and turned into a mass grave decades before anyone in a Pip-Boy came knocking on the door. But the vaults kept humming along, and there's a real answer for how. First, water. Every vault sat on top of a natural aquifer and pulled groundwater up through purification systems that ran on machinery controlled by something called a water chip. The chip is the single most important component in the entire vault. It's what keeps the pumps running, the filters cleaning, and the tanks full. break the chip, and you have maybe 150 days before the whole thing dries up, which is exactly what happened in Vault 13 and kicked off the plot of the first game. Food is trickier, but not impossible. Most vaults ran hydroponics bays where crops were grown under artificial light in perfectly controlled conditions, which meant no pests, bad weather, or bad luck. On top of that, vaults had food synthesizers, machines that would extrude raw vegetable fiber, protein pastes, and grain-based dough that could be shaped and grilled into whatever the kitchen wanted to serve that day. That's how Vault 101 could still throw a birthday party with a real cake 200 years after the war. Now, air is the one nobody talks about, but it's actually the most impressive. Vaults ran closed-loop atmospheric systems, recycling exhaled CO2 through scrubbers and pumping fresh oxygen back through the vents. The tech was based on the same kind of life support you'd need in a submarine, or, more interestingly, a spaceship. How big are vaults, actually? Every vault you've ever explored in a Fallout game is lying to you. That's because the developers built them small enough so you can actually walk and have fun in them, but that also means none of the vaults can really come close to showing you their accurate size and scale, because in the actual lore, they're ginormous. Take Vault 13, for example. In its own official spec sheet, it's rated for 500 residents or a full 1,000 if everyone agrees to hot bunk and shifts. But the in-game version doesn't really have enough room for even a fraction of that population. But the real blueprints paint a very different picture. You see, a single standard living quarters level came out to 20,000 square feet of usable space, and that's before you count the farms, the reactor, the command center, or any other floors stacked below it. To get a real sense of scale, think about a large cruise ship. The old ocean liners could carry 1,600 passengers plus crew, and they crammed in ballrooms, restaurants, engine rooms, pools, and everything else needed for the trip. Strip out the propulsion, replace it with more storage, and bury the whole thing underground. And that's roughly the full size of a vault. But those are only standard-sized vaults because there are specialty vaults available in the lore. Vault 118, for example, was carved into a hollowed-out mountain and included a full-sized replica mansion for its wealthy residents. And so the unfortunate truth of the matter is, we've never actually seen a full-sized vault in any Fallout game because it's just impractical for the developers. How did the vault dwellers prevent inbreeding? If you lock 1,000 people underground for 200 years and don't let anyone new in, you'd think the whole population would eventually turn into a cast of extras from The Hills Have Eyes. But the actual math and science behind this says otherwise. You see, geneticists have calculated that the minimum viable human population, the smallest group that can breed for hundreds of years without stacking up dangerous recessive traits, sits somewhere around 160 to 180 people, assuming decent medical care and some record keeping. Vaults were designed to hold 1,000. That's 5 to 6 times the minimum, which gives you plenty of genetic room to work with, as long as people don't just marry their siblings and call it a day. But some vaults didn't even trust their own population pool to handle it, so they built the fix directly into how the vault operated. For example, Vault 33. It was wired into a triangle with Vault 32 and Vault 31, and every few years the vaults ran what they called the triennial trade: tools, expertise, equipment, but sometimes this is when marriages happen. Lucy McLean went through exactly this process, applying to the council for a husband from Vault 32, because, in her own words, she couldn't find a suitable partner in 33 that she wasn't already related to. Now, of course, not every vault had a sister vault to trade with. Some vaults have fewer people and operate without an exchange program, so that means it just ran on borrowed time since day one. They can definitely delay the inevitable with careful planning. But yes, it's inevitable over a long enough period of time. But hey, at least being around a few inbred dwellers is a much better situation than whatever that guy in Vault 77 is having, because even if he tried, there's definitely no inbreeding there, but he's got bigger problems. Why do wastelanders still think of vault dwellers are crazy, even after the heroes saved them? You'd think that after a couple of vault dwellers walked out of holes in the ground and saved civilization on multiple occasions, the wasteland would maybe warm up to the idea that people in blue jumpsuits are actually alright. Remember, the vault dweller took down the Master and his entire super mutant army. The lone wanderer saved the capital wasteland by getting Project Purity working. And finally, the sole survivor cleaned up the whole Commonwealth, took down the existential threat that posed from the Institute, and basically single-handedly rebuilt the Minutemen. All of these were folks from underground. And yet somewhere in Philly, a woman still looks at Lucy and immediately assumes she's about to die in a ditch wearing a tacky uniform. So why is that? Well, if you think about it, 3 heroes across 2 centuries doesn't actually look that impressive. For every vault dweller that saved humanity, there are hundreds of Garys running around a vault trying to strangle each other because Vault Tech thought cloning experiments would be fun. In another case, there's an entire tribe called the Boomers, who are vault dwellers that decided the correct way to interact with outsiders is with sustained artillery fire. Vault 95, on the other hand, spat out a bunch of junkies, and Vault 77 produced one guy in a crate of puppets who's probably really not okay right now. So when the average wastelander sees someone in a bright blue, skin-tight jumpsuit with a wrist computer wandering around town and demanding everyone's life story, their pattern recognition is actually working perfectly. Why did some vaults never open? Vault-Tec sold the vaults as temporary shelters. Get in, wait for the fallout to clear, get the all-clear signal, come back out and rebuild. That was the pitch on the brochure, and it's what most residents thought they were signing up for. But to some vaults, the all-clear signal never really came. Vault-Tec was supposed to be running a central operation that monitored radiation levels and broadcast the go-ahead when it was safe to open the doors. But that operation collapsed, or was never really set up, or was quietly folded into the Enclave's private plans. Nobody was left on the outside to tell anyone it was okay to come out, so the overseers waited. Vault 111's overseer refused to open the door for over a year because he was still waiting for the official signal from Vault-Tec headquarters that would never come, and eventually his own security staff mutinied and killed everyone who wasn't already in a cryopod. In other cases, vaults kept the doors sealed on purpose. For example, Vault 101. You see, the entire experiment for this vault was to see how long a population could stay isolated without ever knowing the outside world existed. The overseer's job was to make sure the door stayed shut for centuries and to shoot anyone who tried to leave. Meanwhile, some vaults died out completely from the failed experiments before they ever got the chance to reopen. This was the case with Vault 106, where it was pumped with psychoactive gas through the vents on day 1 and lost the entire population to dweller crashouts within weeks of being there. Vault 87 turned everyone into super mutants when the FEV testing got out of hand. And then there were the vaults where the exit itself was compromised. Vault 87 also took a near-direct hit from a bomb that jammed the door mechanism shut. Some had their entrances collapse or get buried under debris. A few, like Vault 111, only opened because someone from the outside came knocking. And so the result is a wasteland dotted with sealed vaults, most of them being tombs, and a few of them still hosting whoever's left of the original population. What was the point of all the vault experiments? You'd think the point of a giant underground shelter would be pretty self-explanatory, right? Keep the humans alive, ride out the nuclear winter, and pop back up when the radiation dies down. Vault-Tec looked at that concept and thought, hey, that's cool and all, but what if we also use them for something else? And that was human experimentation done on a scale that would make Unit 731 cry tears of joy. The official pitch was that the vaults would test humanity's resilience in confined, isolated environments, data that would eventually be used to design multi-generational spaceships to colonize other planets when the Earth got too crispy. Now, that's the noble, sanitized version of the story, but the real version is much more depressing. Vault-Tec was essentially a front company for the Enclave, the shadow government running the US behind the scenes, and the Enclave already had their own private bunker off the coast of California, so the Vault program was never really about saving regular civilians in the first place. It was about generating data. The Enclave wanted to know how populations behave under extreme confinement, how societies fracture in isolation, and how much manipulation a group will tolerate before it breaks. That kind of information is hard to gather when your test subjects have rights and lawyers. Lock them underground for a century and tell them it's for their own good, though, and suddenly the ethics board isn't a problem anymore. Vault-Tec also figured out a second revenue stream along the way, selling vaults to other megacorporations as private research facilities. Any company with enough money could rent itself a captive human population and test whatever it wanted. The data was supposed to eventually flow up to the Enclave's oil rig, where it would inform post-war reconstruction plans and the space colonization project, except none of it was ever used. Vault-Tec didn't survive the war it may have started, the oil rig got blown up by a tribal hero a couple centuries later, and the Enclave has spent every game since slowly getting dismantled by whichever protagonist the series happens to be following. So the actual point of the Vault program, in the end, was nothing. And that's everything you've ever wondered about Fallout Vaults. Did I answer the question you've always had, or is there another Vault mystery you'd like me to cover? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Fallout lore dives.